the op plan: lead the target into the trap set at the back of the barn. The op plan was hopeful, Alpha Group decided, but it was based on knowledge of militant tactics here in the Caucasus. When ambushed by a larger force, the leadership would run. It was not that the Dagestani and Chechens were cowards. No, courage they possessed in spades, but their leaders were precious to them. The foot soldiers would engage the attackers, manning outbuildings and sandbagged bunkers. From there, a single man with a single weapon could hold off an entire raiding force for the time it took the leader and his close protection detail to flee into impenetrable mountains that they would likely know as well as they knew the contours of their lovers' bodies. So the 8 men of the Spetsnaz blocking force waited, controlled their breathing and the beating of their hearts, and prepared to capture one man. In the administrative pouches of their ballistic plate carriers, each operator on the mission carried a beige laminated card with a photograph of the face of Israpil Navayev. To be captured by these Russian special forces and have your face match the photo of the man they saw would be an unenviable fate. But to be captured by these Russian special forces and have your face not match the photo of the man they saw would be even worse, because these Russians needed only one man in this village alive. 2. The dogs were the first to react. A growl from a large Caucasian sheepdog started a chorus from other animals around the village. They had not alerted to the smell of the Russians, because the Spetsnaz men masked their scents with chemicals and silver-lined underwear that held in body odors. But the dogs sensed movement, and they began to bark in numbers that spared them from the 22 pistols. The Dagestani sentries at the front of the barn looked around. A few waved flashlights in bored arcs. One yelled at the animals to shut up. But when the barking turned into a sustained chorus, when a few of the animals began howling, then the sentries stood, and rifles were brought to shoulders. Only then did the thump of the rotors fill the valley. Israpil had fallen asleep, but now he found himself up, standing before fully awake, moving before fully aware of what exactly had roused him. "Russian choppers!" someone shouted, which was plain enough at this point, because Nabiyev could hear the thumping rotors across the valley, and no one save for the Russians had any helicopters around here. Israpil knew they had seconds to flee, and he gave the order to do just that. The leader of his security force shouted into his radio, ordered the Argvani cell to grab their rocket-propelled grenade launchers and get into the open to engage the approaching aircraft. Then he told the 2 drivers to bring their pickups right up to the front door of the barn. Israpil was fully alert now. He thumbed the safety down on his short-barreled AK and moved toward the front of the barn with the weapon at his shoulder. He knew the sound of choppers would resonate in the valley for another minute before the Russians would actually arrive overhead. He'd spent the past 2 decades ducking Russian helos, and he was an expert on their abilities and shortcomings. The first truck arrived at the front of the barn 30 seconds later. One of the guards outside opened the passenger door and then leapt up into the bed behind. Then 2 more men opened the front door to the barn not 20 feet away. Israpil was the 3rd man out the door. He'd taken no more than 2 steps into the early morning air when the supersonic cracks of small arms fire erupted nearby. At first, he thought it was one of his men shooting blindly into the dark, but a hot, wet slap of blood against his face dispelled him of that notion. One of his guards had been shot, his ripped chest spewing blood as he